another installment of our audition preparation series, and today we're speaking with Miss Frances from Foundation Strings. Hi, Miss Frances, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about our Foundation Strings, I think, violin excerpt, right?
Yes.
And how and all of our Foundation Strings audition needs can benefit from all the things we're going to talk about, but we're going to focus in on violin and talk about some of the things we listen for in the audition room. So let me put up screen share and we can take a look at this excerpt. All right, so this is the violin excerpt that we've chosen for Foundation Strings. Now, Miss Frances, if you could talk a little bit about um, what you look for in the audition room. What are like some of the key things?
So a couple of things that I'm looking for is posture, technique. I'm also looking and listening for production of sound
Mm-hmm.
and to see how they execute the key signature and some of the rhythm
Good.
as
So rhythm, tone production, and technique. Those are the kind of the things that you're highlighting. Great. So let's take a look at this excerpt and maybe look at some of the tricky spots for each of those things. So I know when I'm in my audition room and Miss Helen and myself, the first thing we listen for, and I'm sure with Miss Frances with you it's the same, is rhythm. So what are some of the trickier spots in this excerpt for rhythm and how can we practice them?
So some of the tricky spots, of course, would be some of the eighth note sections.
Okay.
So in relationship to the quarter notes before and after it, also with the slurs. Another tricky section actually is some of the half notes and whole notes, and that's because of bow use and speed. So not running out of bow and be able to sustain the sound.
Okay, so kind of these two bars maybe might be a little bit tricky and what you might be listening for when it comes to rhythm.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, let's look at this. Which bar would you like to start with, Miss Frances, for some exercises how we can practice this?
We can start right on the first measure.
Okay, so this is a great bar for rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
How would you kind of practice this bar?
So I would definitely use a metronome.
Okay.
I know for foundation strings, some people are new to the metronome, and that's basically where we have the pulse or the beat of the music clicking, depending on if you have an app or if you have a handheld electronic metronome.
I
But
have one
that's
right on my phone, so you can download that for free.
yeah, me too. I like this one because it has a fun smiley face.
Oh.
And the app. But I also have a wooden antique one that's pretty fun. So you always want to set the metronome to the smallest beat of music that you have, or music note notation. Mm-hmm. So I would put that on eighth notes. That way I can really think and subdivide the micro beats and the smaller counts.
Okay, so I would set my eighth notes, and because it gives me a tempo at the quarter note, what would I set my metronome to for eighth notes?
I would start with 108, and if you can get to 112, that's not much more. So
if I'm doing eighth notes, though, does it need to be twice that?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to set my eighth notes. These are eighth notes to 216. Now, it sounds really fast, but remember, these are eighth notes. 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and.
Awesome. And then depending on the metronome that you have, sometimes you can set it on 108, but then you can actually click the note. So some of them have eighth notes or options on there as well.
Great.
If you don't, then yes, you need to double that note to where it's eighth note instead of quarter note.
So then how would you practice this on your violin once we have the metronome set up?
So the very first bowing too is you should start at the frog. That way you have enough room and space to be able to sustain the sound. So because it's a half note, it needs to have 4 clicks if you're doing the eighth notes, because we have 1 and 2 and to make sure that we fill up that whole space of time. Mm-hmm. And then for the E and the F sharp on the E string, that needs to be 2 clicks because 2 eighth notes equal a quarter note. And it's also important to use a 4th finger instead of your open E string for sound.
Okay, so can you demonstrate that, how you practice that on your violin?
Sure. So it's important that I start near the bridge and closer to the frog to make sure that I can get the full sound.
Okay.
And then because it's the 4/8 notes, I might want to line up 4 different eighth notes starting on the D with a metronome.
Oh.
So I know I need to think 1 and 2, and even though I'm going to sustain the sound. And then I would continue maybe doing the eighth notes on the count 3 and 4 as well. So from eighth notes, the whole first measure.
Oh, great. Can you do that one more time? Awesome. So you kind of broke the first bar down here into its subdivisions in eighth notes.
Correct.
Awesome. Can you show us how you would do that in this bar here? Sure. I guess this is bar 6. Awesome. Do that one more time and then play it as written for us.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a really good exercise that we break all of these rhythms down into their eighth notes, because you'll be listening to make sure that there's 4 eighth notes here and 2 eighth notes for each of these quarter notes.
Correct. So that's kind of your early exercises for subdividing. And then as you develop and practice, then you don't have to break it down into smaller beats. You can just think that.
Awesome. So the next thing you talked about was you're listening for is tone production. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So 3 very important things with sound production is obviously going to be in your bow, and it's where you place your bow on the string, how much weight you press into the string, and how fast you pull the bow. And so it's important that when you're thinking about a mezzo forte or forte lane, that's going to be closer to the bridge. And then as you get softer, you get a little bit closer to the fingerboard. So with a strong forte or mezzo forte sound, you want to press your bow down. So if you can see the angle
here, let me stop screen share here so that we can see you. Okay.
Okay, so you would press the stick down. Now, all the way down is going to be much too harsh. Mm-hmm. But if you left about halfway and you're closer to the bridge, then you're going to have a nice sound. You also want to square up your arm. That way, your bow direction is going parallel to the bridge. And then the speed, you're going to use a faster bow speed to get a solid sound. And then slower bow speed, obviously, if you have to hold for a much longer note, but you still have to have weight into the string so it's not airy and has a strong sound.
Awesome. And then I think posture is really important for sound production as well, right? And I think you'll be looking for that in the audition room.
Absolutely. So for bow hand position, it's really important that your fingers are curved. Especially, I see a lot of students' bow hand where their thumb is either really straight or their pinky is really straight. Anytime we have tension or straight fingers that cannot bend, it's going to be really hard to have a parallel bow, but then also to extend all the way to the tip and to get all the way to the frog.
Okay, great. So those are some things you're going to be looking for in the practice room as well. In the audition room. So, and then I think the last thing that you mentioned was technique. So let me look at the excerpt again. Some of these places where it says to use your 4th finger, like in these 2 bars. And then you have another bar here where it says that it's okay to use an open string. Can you talk a little bit about this 4th finger fingering?
Yes, so it's not only important to use 4th finger because of the sound, but also for string crossings. So anytime you have a 4th finger, it's to avoid a string crossing, and also the tone is much nicer with 4th finger. And then if it does mark an open string, it's because of the direction of the note. So then we're going to be moving onto the E string instead of staying on the A string.
So you'll be looking to make sure that people playing this excerpt are using the fingerings marked in the excerpt.
Correct.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about how to prepare for the audition?
So for slurs, this is where the note is changing, but your bow direction is not changing. So you have to think about how you're going to divide your bow in half. For a quarter note slur, you'll think about putting one quarter note in the lower half and then the other quarter note in the upper half. So you'll have to practice actually moving the finger and then also spacing your bow.
Can you give us an exercise maybe in this bar right here, bar 11, that can help us with that bow distribution?
Sure. You can start and stop, kind of like in slow motion.
Okay. So can you show us that? Yeah.
And then you can do the opposite direction as well.
Awesome. Let me stop screen share so we can see you a little more close up. Okay, do it again for us.
Yep. So you want to think about the angle of your arm between the strings. And then I'm going to angle down to the A string. I'm also preparing my finger ahead of time. That way it's ready to go when I need it.
Okay, so do that slowly a few times, right?
Correct. And you can go forwards and backwards. It's always good to transition between the two notes before and after.
Awesome. Great. It sounds like a lot of good practice tips for preparing this excerpt. And I think if we all do that, this excerpt becomes much less complicated.
Absolutely. Always break it down smaller chunks and areas. Slow the tempo down. Don't try to practice right from the start at that tempo. You might want to maybe go 50 clicks slower until you can work up to that performance tempo.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Miss Francis. That's been really helpful.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. See you all in the audition.